Did you prefer Jeff or Jeffrey?
Hey, you is fine.
Sweet.
Either one, whatever's good for you. I'm fine with both.
Oh man. So Jeff, first of all, man, I love this book. It was really great. It took me back to when I read everything I know about filmmaking. I learned from the Toxic Avenger, which I must have read like 15 years ago, maybe.
Yep.
Um,
I remember when Lloyd was writing it.
so I love how you carried on that tradition. What made you decide to do that?
Well, it's kind of funny, Billy. A number of years ago, I was kind of a dad blogger. And as a dad blogger, I got invited to a lot of events by brands. And I was at an event in Detroit for Ford, the Ford Motor Company. And as one of the evening activities, they had something called an Ignite presentation. And what an Ignite presentation is you give a 5-minute presentation, and it's supposed to be on a topic that will ignite some interest, and et cetera, et cetera. And you get 5 minutes and 20 slides, and the slides change every 15 seconds, no matter what. So you have to time and present, you can't control the slide. So it's kind of a challenge to do it. And I was thinking about what could I talk about that would be interesting, visual, because you have these 20 slides. And out of the blue, it dawned on me, my time at Troma was really interesting. A lot of what I did there relates to business and marketing that I apply today. And it'd be very visual. I could put together some really killer slides, with images from the movies and things like that. So I decided to do my Ignite talk as everything I know about marketing I learned from the Toxic Avenger. And I did that talk, my 5-minute talk, and it went really well. And towards the end of it, as my 5 minutes was running out, I said, I only have 5 minutes. My time's running out. I could talk about this all day. I could probably write a book about it. I think I should. And I said that as part of the presentation. And then after it was over and I watched the video, because it was on YouTube, it's still on YouTube. I watched the video and I said, that went over pretty well. It was kind of a fun talk. It's an interesting topic. It's a different take on business and marketing. Maybe I should write a book. And that's really what prompted me to go ahead and write the book. And the book, of course, has a nice short title, Everything I Know About Business and Marketing I Learned from the Toxic Avenger, One Man's Journey to Hell's Kitchen and Back. So it's nice, short and sweet, easy to remember.
Oh
But that's
man, I
what
love
sparked
it.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you approach Lloyd?
Well, Lloyd and I left Troma in 1994, but I was there for 7.5 years. And over that time became very good friends with Lloyd and remain very good friends with him to this day. So I was always in touch with Lloyd even after I left. And if he was in Florida or if I was in New York, we'd get together. I met up with him at various Comic-Cons in the area. So we had a good relationship. So when I decided I was going to write the book, I had shown him that presentation and I told him, I'm going to write this book. And is it okay if I, call it this? And can I use a picture of Toxie on the cover and blah, blah, blah. And he was thrilled and very, very encouraging and supporting, and even wrote the foreword to the book. So it was all good.
It's funny. I love the incongruity about Yale and Michael and yourself having gone to Yale. That kills me for some reason.
Yeah, Lloyd and Michael went to Yale. I actually went to Cornell. But all Ivy Leaguers.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, Lloyd's an interesting guy. He's a Yale graduate. He studied Chinese in college long before China was important as it is today. He speaks Mandarin. I remember going to eat with Lloyd at Chinese restaurants, and he'd start, talking to the waiter or waitress in Mandarin, and they were always surprised because back then no one spoke Mandarin. Today, it's a great skill to have.
Right.
He just has a passion for these types of entertaining movies and more importantly, he has a passion for control, for being in control, for being able to create these crazy movies that also may have an underlying political or social message to them, and even the Toxic Avenger and all its love and gore, had an underlying environmental message, which we even brought front and center when we turned it into the Toxic Crusaders cartoon series. And then it was really a very blatant, ecological message. And I think Lloyd and Michael created something very special, because here we are, and it's, I think, approaching 45 years old, which makes Troma really the oldest active independent film studio in the world. Everyone else has gotten gobbled up, and Lloyd and Michael are still able to run their little fiefdom, their little piece of the entertainment industry, however they want, and they don't have to answer to anyone but themselves. And I think that's, part of their passion and part of the success and longevity of Troma.
For sure. I mean, it's beautiful. I'm amazed that they're still able to do that, that they've been able to change with the time so much. What have you personally learned from that that you utilize?
Oh gosh, I mean that's really the whole point of the book. So really,
Yeah.
what I do in the book is it recounts a lot of anecdotes and a lot of behind the scenes stories from my time at Troma and the movies I worked on while I was there. But in each case, I kind of extract lessons that I learned from that experience that I've been using throughout my career. So, even though I left Troma, over 20 some odd years ago, to this day, a lot of the things I learned through that experience, I apply to my role as a chief marketing officer at a number of different companies in a number of different industries. And there's a lot about Troma that's really smart about branding, about culture. There's one chapter in the book about the power of we, which
Yes.
is really interesting because, there's no I in Tromaville. That was the rule. Well, technically, there's the letter I in the word Tromaville, but we were taught and trained, and it was beat into our heads, sometimes physically, that when you were representing Troma, you could never use the word I. It was
Yeah.
always we. If I was writing you a note, Billy, to say, we have this podcast appointment scheduled, I'd have to say, hey, Billy, we look forward to recording your podcast tomorrow afternoon or whatever it is. Not I, even though it's just you and I on the podcast. It's always
Right.
we. And it didn't matter if it was coming from Lloyd or Michael or from an unpaid intern. It was always we. And that was very powerful. And even to this day, I feel uncomfortable sometimes when I'm in a meeting and I say, I did this or I did that,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
in business, it's rarely alone. You're rarely alone. And, unless you're truly a sole proprietor, but if you're in any other type of business, even with one partner or two or three employees, it's a collaborative thing. And everyone's been in that situation where they're in a conference room and someone stands up and says, well, I did this and I did that. And you're thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, I kind of helped with that project. I was part of that team. So by using we instead of I, it does a number of things. Number one, it creates a sense of community within the company, right? It
Hmm.
creates that sense of, okay, we're a team, we're in this together, we're working on it. It's inclusive. So you're not turning off people who may have contributed to a project, you're including them. And it sends a signal outside too. So, people outside the industry, every correspondence they got from Troma always started with greetings from Tromaville. And then the first word was almost always we. We look forward to this. We want you to do that, whatever. But it's always we. And it really made Troma stand out. And we got different reactions, not only from potential business partners, but from the media, from the press. I think it just created more of an inclusive feeling. And that was a really great lesson I learned. And still to this day, I try to use we much more than I use I.
Absolutely. I mean, I grew up in Tromaville, I guess you could say, insofar as I grew up on Toxic Crusaders. I used to stay up late every weekend and I'd watch the movies on the USA Network. Before I even really knew what Troma was, that they were the ones putting out those movies, I felt like I was a part of that atmosphere, and I loved it. And you brought up, you compared it to Marvel Comics, which they were kind of tied close with at some points. But it's also kind of similar to Disney too in that regard, isn't it? You create this whole world.
Absolutely. It's interesting you bring that up, Billy. You're absolutely right. And when you think about building a brand in the movie industry in particular, the studios really haven't been brands. You don't go to a movie, and there are some exceptions, which I'll mention, but typically you don't go to a movie because it's a Paramount Pictures movie or it's from 20th Century Fox. You go to a movie because it stars someone you like, or because it's based on a book you read and you enjoyed,
Yeah.
or you read about the story and you're interested in it. And the studio is in the background. The exception was Disney, of course. Disney built a brand so people would go to a Disney movie. Didn't matter what the movie was. If it was a Disney movie, they knew what they could expect. They knew for the most part it was going to be family friendly, et cetera, et cetera. And Troma built that brand like Disney. When people would go to see a Troma movie, they were going to see a Troma movie. The actual movie didn't always matter. They knew if it was coming from Troma, it was going to deliver a certain type of entertainment and a certain type of, what they were looking for seeing. There's a certain flavor to a Troma movie. And Marvel, you're absolutely right. And it's interesting because Marvel, we did partner with Marvel. Stan Lee actually was, rest in peace, Stan, was a good
Yeah.
friend of Lloyd's, and Lloyd and Stan actually wrote a screenplay together. And Stan often visited us in Tromaville. So I've had the pleasure of spending a little time with Stan Lee, and he created the Marvel universe, and everything had to fit within that Marvel universe. And in many respects, there is the Troma universe too. Many of the films that we produced ourselves were set in Tromaville. There are recurring characters between the films, recurring themes. So much like Marvel, Troma created this kind of universe that its films lived within.
Yeah. I especially like the part where you talked about sharing ideas, not being afraid to do so. Uh, I was curious though. I guess what I would say is you have to really love the company. Do you really have to love the company to want to share your ideas?
I think you have to love, well, no, you have to love yourself, right? You have to be
Yeah.
proud of your ideas and want them to be executed upon. And one of the things is, ideas themselves are a dime a dozen. Everyone has hundreds of thousands of ideas. Many of the ideas we have, other people have had similar or the same ideas. What matters is the execution, bringing those ideas to life. And if you treat your own ideas as a little bit too precious, unless you're going to execute on them, they're never going to get done. So I've always been a proponent of being open and sharing good ideas. And Troma was very open to accepting good ideas. Lloyd is very good at that. I mean, if someone was delivering a pizza to the office and they said, hey, in your next movie, you ought to do such and such, and Lloyd heard it and it was a good idea, he'd say, oh, that's a great idea, we're going to do that. And he would do it. He would use that idea. So good ideas in Tromaville came from anyone and everyone, and that was encouraged. Obviously, at the end of the day, the film director had the final say, but anyone was welcome to contribute an idea. And it's funny because the very first time I met Lloyd and Michael, before I began to work at Tromaville, I was working at another company called Satori Entertainment, and we were in distribution. And we were doing pretty well with syndication of movies to pay TV in the early days of HBO and Showtime and TV syndication. And I was looking to acquire more movies for us to distribute. And I had heard about Troma, and I knew they had a big library of films, and they were only up the block from us. So I reached out initially to Lloyd and Michael on behalf of Satori to try to see if I could make a deal with them for us to distribute their movies for TV syndication. So I went up to the Troma building and met with Lloyd and Michael, and we had a great conversation. We all hit it off very well personally. They had absolutely no interest in doing business with Satori. Troma's attitude is if anyone's going to distribute their movies to TV, it's going to be them, right? They didn't want to work with another company. But we hit it off really well. And Lloyd said, I'll give you a tour of the office. So he took me up to the editing room, which was on the fourth floor. And the editing room, by the way, it's not video editing in those days. It was flatbed film, where literally you are cutting and splicing film and soundtracks together. And they were working on the trailer for the Toxic Avenger. So the movie had been out already a little bit, and they were trying to do a new trailer for another release of the film. And Lloyd showed me the trailer and asked me what I thought. And the trailer at the time had a tagline, a different kind of hero. And it was pretty straightforward, kind of dry. And he said, what do you think? And I said, well, my understanding about the Toxic Avenger is, yes, it's action, it's gore, it's a monster, but there's some humor to it, right? It's kind of funny. And he goes, yes, there's humor. I said, and I said, and isn't the Toxic Avenger, in Tromaville, it's in New Jersey, right? Yes, Tromaville, New Jersey. That's my Lloyd imitation. Sorry. And I said, and he goes, well, what do you think? I said, well, so I think you need a tagline that kind of expresses that gives a hint, a kind of a wink to the audience that, yeah, there's some humor here. Well, what would you say? So on the top of my head, I just said, the first superhero from New Jersey, right? Which is kind of a wink to New Jersey, because at that time, especially, people in New York were making fun of New Jersey, calling it the armpit of the country, blah, blah, blah. So it was kind of a joke to say the first superhero from New Jersey. And Lloyd says, oh, I like that. Can we use it? I said, sure. So I gave them that idea. I didn't work for Troma. I just met them. And I said, yeah, go ahead and use it. And sure enough, they did. They changed the trailer, changed the tagline, and to this day, that is the tagline for the Toxic Avenger, the first superhero from New Jersey. And I think the lesson there is, number one, from my side, I didn't mind giving away a good idea to someone I didn't know, because it wasn't my movie. I wasn't going to make that tagline for a movie. And if it made their movie better, that's great. So I gave that to them. And from Lloyd's perspective, he was willing and open to accept a new idea, even though it actually cost them money because they had to go change the tagline on the posters and this and that. But he recognized, I like this idea better than the original tagline, which he probably came up with himself. So the fact that they're very open to accepting those ideas, and I was open to sharing an idea and not worry, oh, that's my idea. Oh, you got to pay me for that. Oh, it's all good. And it ended up obviously leading to a great relationship in the future. So, I think that was a good example of both giving and getting.
I had that poster on my wall. I bought it for $7.99 when I was 14. And so I hope he made his money back.
Yeah, no, it's all good. And the Toxic Avenger, I mean, again, going back to Troma and the uniqueness of the brand, the fact that character, the Toxic Avenger, that emerged from toxic waste into a bloody, gory, R-rated movie. I mean, it's pretty rough.
Yeah,
I mean, it's funny and it's got a huge cult following, but let's face it, the Toxic Avenger original movie is pretty rough.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yet that character has gone on to have 3 sequels, 2 of which I worked on, 3 sequels. Then we turned it into a Saturday morning cartoon show for kids. Right. So this R-rated character became a cartoon on Saturday mornings, plus a line of toys from Playmates Toys and 70 products from pajamas to coloring books to Marvel Comics to video games and on and on and on. And that same character has since been turned into a very successful off-Broadway musical, which is played in theaters all over the world and won awards. That same character is now being remade into a Hollywood style, big budget film starring Peter Dinklage. Peter Dinklage is going to play.
So they're finally doing it, huh?
Wow. Finally doing it. So, that character has probably had more iterations even than Mickey Mouse, because I'll tell you what, one thing Toxie's done that Mickey Mouse hasn't, and that's star in an R-rated movie, right?
Oh man, that's so great when you put it that way. It really is. I mean, it shows the versatility of the thinking behind Troma, right? And the business acumen, certainly. There's some infamous mistakes that were made along the way that Lloyd mentioned in his first book, such as shooting too much footage for Toxic Avenger. Was it 2?
We shot so much for Toxic Avenger 2 that we ended up turning it into Toxic Avenger 2 and 3 from one shoot. Yeah.
So he always, the whole company, not he, they always seem to be ahead of the curve, right? Where did they misstep? Not to make them look bad, but what missteps did they make and what do they learn from that? Because I imagine that's also got to be a big part of the business world too, right? Or their success is learning from missteps.
Yeah, I think sometimes perhaps early on, and I don't want to speak for Lloyd, he probably would answer it better, but I guess being so intensely independent, perhaps in the early days prevented what's happening now from happening sooner, meaning having a big budget Hollywood remake of one of their characters, or moving Troma more into the mainstream. We almost got there with the cartoon series, but there are always setbacks along the way. We were very close to having a big budget Hollywood movie based on the Toxic Crusaders. But you know how Hollywood works, things get into development hell, and for one reason or another, that never came to fruition. So, I think the fierce independence was both an asset and maybe in some ways held the company back at times. But but I think these are choices they made, and the way Troma wanted to operate and the way Lloyd and Michael wanted to operate. And obviously it's been successful. They have a huge following after 45 years in business, and really have a place in film history.
You hear this a lot in business. I certainly hear it in mine. Stay in your lane. What do you think of that? What do you make of that statement?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and it ties into corporate culture. You want to be true to your brand, right? And it was a challenge to be true to the Troma brand and also do a cartoon series, for example, was challenging. But we tried to make the Toxic Crusaders, while definitely child friendly, as edgy child friendly as we could, and still to retain some of the core humor and characteristics of Tromaville, right? Even though it was toned down to be family friendly versus the R-rated movies. But it still was true to the Troma brand. And I think that's important. And part of that Troma brand was, We always took the business of making films seriously, but we never took ourselves too seriously. And I talk about this in the book, as it relates to entrepreneurs and startups. You have to recognize, to your point, Billy, you have to recognize who you are and what you represent, and be true to that. So, if you're a tech startup that's making some consumer product, you're not necessarily going to change the world. You're not curing cancer. You're not, creating a vaccine for a pandemic. So you have to make sure you don't present your business as if you are, right? You have to be realistic about what you are, right? We were realistic. We're not making Academy Award winning films. We're making fun entertainment, and we were always true to that. So we took the business of making that entertainment seriously, but we didn't take ourselves too seriously. And we never presented Troma movies as, oh my gosh, this is the next Gone with the Wind. And I think the media respected that. I think we generally got pretty good reviews from some very famous film critics for movies that they don't even generally review, because we never presented them as greater than what we are. We were truthful, and authentic, and being authentic, especially today. And there's a lot about that in the book, is more important than ever with the internet and social media. People can cut through bullshit immediately. So there's no point in trying to present your business or your product as something that's going to change the world if it's not. Now, that doesn't say there aren't companies that are going to change the world. There are, but you have to understand where you sit in that spectrum and be true to it.
I see what you're saying. When I first read that book, again, that must have been 15, almost 20 years ago, whenever it first came out. And I was really excited about it. I had dropped out of film school. I started a film company, and that was kind of my Bible for a little bit. And I remember reading through it. Maybe I was just too cynical when I was younger, because I remember thinking to myself, oh, that would never work now. Well, of course it worked for Lloyd 20 years ago when video stores first came on the scene, and he took advantage of the fact that they needed product, Lloyd doesn't know what he's talking about. He's out of touch. I think I was reading it wrong. I think, you really have to take advantage of the technology and where things are in the moment, don't you? I guess that's probably the lesson I should have learned.
Absolutely. And Troma, again, even though it's a small independent studio, Troma always stayed on top of what's new. When I was there, in the early 1990s, before the World Wide Web as we know it today, and we had the Toxic Crusaders, we were doing live chats with Toxie, which was me talking as if or typing as if I was Toxie, in the CompuServe Showbiz Forum, which was kind of the popular part of CompuServe for films and entertainment. Roger Ebert was in there all the time. And so we had live, people could chat, with Toxie live. Now today, so many years later, I mean, every fictional character has their own Instagram account and everything else. So we were doing that then. Troma was very early to adopt to streaming. Troma now, is a streaming network for Troma films. You mentioned USA Network. We did that deal. I did that deal with USA Network to get our films on Up All Night. And if you watched it, you might have seen me a couple of times during the interstitials playing with Toxic Crusaders toys with Gilbert Gottfried and Rhonda Shear.
I had to
on
have
that show. Yes. So
yes.
It was fun times. So yeah, it's important to look at the opportunities that new technology and new trends bring. And I think that's something that was interesting about the film business from a studio's perspective is, I mentioned the Troma library. You're building a library of films. How that library gets distributed to viewers changes over time and adapts. First it was theatrical, then home video came along. Now streaming comes along, DVDs came along. So if you have that library of content, you can always adapt it to the new methodologies of distribution. So that's why there's so much value in owning content. And even today, outside of the film industry, if you're building social media presence for your brand, you have a blog, you have a YouTube channel, you want to create content that can be repurposed in different ways across all those channels, right? So if you have a great video, you might have the long form version of that video up on your YouTube channel. You might have 1 minute snippet of it in Instagram. You might do a short thing with it on Snapchat or TikTok. There's a lot of different ways to repurpose the content. You might write a blog post about it and link to the video. So, just like we do distributing movies in all these different channels, as a brand or as a company, you want to think about the different ways you could repurpose your content. Now, I learned about repurposing content from Troma, because if you watch carefully, since we were a low budget operation, we did spend money sometimes on some big stunts. So there was one famous stunt we filmed where a car does a roll and flip, right? And it was a pretty complicated, dangerous stunt. And the footage turned out great. The car flips over and rolls. And you will see that car flip in about 6 or 7 different Troma movies. We repurposed that stunt again and again and again, almost to the point where now it's a little bit of a game. Can you spot
For sure.
the scene?
Yeah.
Can you spot that car roll in this movie? But that was a great example of repurposing that content and offsetting the high cost when you amortize it over all the movies it's appeared in. That was a pretty inexpensive stunt, and it was a good thing to do. So repurpose on purpose. That's a chapter in the book.
So it seems like there's a lot of wackiness in the Troma building, right? There's a lot of irreverence, and yet again, very sharp minds. You've got Ivy League educations there. Did that ever clash? The silly art. I mean, I hesitate to use the word art. I don't know if they would like that, but the comic, the silliness, the irreverence. Did that clash often with the classic education business sense?
Well, it was part of, I mean, inside of Tromaville, it was part of it. I mean, that was part of the fun, part of the appeal, and it is art. And Lloyd in particular, and Troma in general, has been has been the object of tributes all over the world. Film festivals have honored Troma, have honored Lloyd, and it is in a way part of the art of film. It's one side of it, one aspect of it. So it's definitely art. And again, art's in the eye of the beholder.
Right.
And there are a lot of beholders who like Troma's art. We, to this day, we've got, lots of people who really enjoy those movies and think back fondly on them from earlier days as well. No, I think the business side of it was still very serious. We were rigid in terms of, making close contact with our international partners, entering into distribution deals all over the world. I mean, the business side was taken very seriously, but yeah, the movies were silly. And as a result, there's certainly a lot of silliness within the office. I mean, the office is a mess. There's, props of body limbs everywhere and posters. And when I worked in the original Troma building, they've since moved to Long Island City, Lloyd and Michael shared an office with desks facing each other. And it was very much like this old school, Hollywood situation where one of them would be on the phone, the other one's hearing half the conversation and screaming at him, "Don't say that. Who are you talking to? What are you doing?" And they're screaming and throwing things across the office at each other, and it was controlled chaos and sometimes uncontrolled chaos, which is an oxymoron, but and a lot of morons, not just oxymorons. So that was the environment, and those were the jokes, and that created the essence of Troma, which was captured both in a perfume and in the movies. We had the Ode to Troma.
I loved how you made no secret about the fact that they weren't even your favorite type of movies.
No, and I mentioned that in the book. I mean, it's really interesting. So for me personally, I appreciate Troma films for the role they play and the audience they serve, but was I a huge diehard Troma fan? If I'm honest, I'd say no. If it was Friday night and it's movie night, is my first choice going to be to watch a Troma film back then? No, it probably wasn't. But I was very passionate about the process. I loved Troma as a company, as a culture, and I was passionate about the process of filmmaking. I loved making the movies, and I also was very passionate about serving the Troma fan. I knew that the movies we were making had fans. And even if I couldn't count myself as one of those diehard fans, I recognized the fans were there, and I wanted to do everything in my power to make the best possible Troma movie to satisfy those Troma fans. And that I became very passionate about. So, and that's the thing, and I write about it in the book. You really have to find, in any job, you have to find the thing that you can be passionate about, because if you're not passionate about it, you're not going to enjoy it. You're not going to do it as well. And no matter what job you have, no matter what role you're in, there's something that you can find to be passionate about. And that's how I was very successful, had a great run at Troma for, 7.5 years. look back at it fondly, wrote a book about my experiences there, because even if I wasn't a diehard fan of the movies, I was a diehard fan of what they were doing and serving their fans.
What kind of movies would have you liked to have made?
Well, I leaned. I had three young kids at the time, so I leaned towards more family fare, and even before I worked for Troma, I had produced I wrote and produced a children's show called My Friend Liberty, which was clay animation and live action. And so I was really excited about Troma getting into the Toxic Crusaders and doing that kind of stuff. So my tastes run the gamut. And don't get me wrong, I like a good horror film and I like a good sci-fi science fiction film, and had a lot of fun writing and making the Troma films I worked on. I co-wrote Kabukiman with Lloyd and
Yeah.
Andrew Osborne, and that was a lot of fun. And it went through many iterations. And there was even at one point a cartoon pilot made for Kabukiman, but it never quite took off. I wish I could get my hands on that pilot because it was kind
What,
of fun turning
what was that
Kabukiman
writing
also.
process like for Kabukiman?
So it was a lot of fun and it was crazy. And again, be open to the unexpected.
Yeah.
There's a chapter about that. When Lloyd and I were working on the Kabukiman script, we were writing it in his place in Manhattan on the Upper West Side. And it was summertime and it was warm, so the windows were open, and we're in a little practically closet of a room where the computer was, and we were working on the screenplay. And all of a sudden alarms go off outside. A car alarm goes off outside, and we look out the window, and some guy had just smashed the window of a car right outside of Lloyd's place. And it reached in and grabbed the radio, and he's starting to run down. We started yelling at him, "Hey, stop that!" And we ran downstairs and ran out on the street and saw the guy, and we chased him. I don't know what we thought we were doing. We're crazy, but we literally chased him down the block. But he got away from us, and we're huffing and puffing and walking back to the back to Lloyd's house to finish writing. And then we came up with the idea to incorporate a car thief into Kabukiman. So if you watch Kabukiman, there's a running gag throughout the movie where at one point a thief breaks into a car. You know how it says has baby on board. Those baby on board
Yeah,
signs,
of
those yellow
course.
baby. So it has a yellow baby on board sign. The thief breaks in, pulls out the radio, and then he puts up a sign next to the baby on board that says "No radio on board." And then later in the movie, the thief comes back and he takes the tires and puts up a sign "No tires on board." And later he comes back and takes something else, and it's kind of a running gag throughout the
Yeah,
movie where
yeah.
they keep wrecking that car and then putting more signs on it of all the things they've taken. So that gag, which ended up in the movie, was a result of us witnessing this guy break into a car right outside Lloyd's house. So the process was being very open to what was happening in our immediate surroundings.
That's fantastic. How long did you work on it for?
I don't
For
remember
the
how long
script.
it took us
Yeah.
to write the script. It was interesting because we were working on Kabukiman in the midst of all the Toxic Crusaders stuff, and Kabukiman was originally written to be a pretty rough R-rated movie in the true spirit of Tromaville. And then we kind of waffled back and forth and said, well, maybe this character has the opportunity to be more of a PG-13 rated character. So there were two kind of versions of the script. One was kind of toned down,
Hmm.
and several different edited versions. Like the original version released was a little bit more toned down. Then I think Lloyd released on DVD the director's cut, which was closer to the more typical R-rated version. So it was a fun project, and we had partners in Japan who were partners on the company, partners on the movie. It was a lot of fun, and I think Kabukiman is a great character to this day, and I hope more gets done with him.
Oh, me too. When you were studying at Cornell, what originally were you studying?
Yeah, I was an English major and studied creative writing and theater. So I was interested in creative pursuits, and ended up, I could have gone to graduate school for directing. I'd gotten into an MFA program at Indiana University, but I kind of felt like I had had enough of the school at that point and wanted to get more real world experience, and went to New York and started working with Satori Entertainment first, and then independently for myself, and then Troma.
Do you ever wonder what would have happened had you not gone to Cornell? What trajectory your life might have taken?
No, I haven't really, to be honest.
I
I
think
haven't.
the reason why I
Yeah.
asked, because I'm certainly not beyond certain class biases, I guess, of some sort. And sometimes I look at Yale graduates. I think, geez, oh boy. And I was reading Dick Cavett first book, and he talked about his Yale experiences a lot, and to the point of nausea. And then I started reading the second book, and he tells a great story in it about essentially that like Yale changed his life. That if he had not gone to Yale, he never would. Well, I wouldn't be reading his book basically, and so that made me rethink it. Like, oh, okay, so I see like why it occupies such an important part in his life, right? And I became a little bit more forgiving about some of his anecdotes about it. But I wondered about like Yale for hers, Yale for Kaufman, Cornell for yourself, Yale for Oliver Stone. Some of the like, what would have happened had these Ivy League educations not come about?
It's an interesting question, Billy, but the truth is, it's easy to look backwards, but I think the college experience, especially back then, had a great impact on my life. Would I have had that same impact had I gone to a different college and still had that college experience? I don't know. I went to Cornell, and same with Dick Cavett. Would he be saying the same thing had he gone to Binghamton
Right.
University or some other school? I don't know. He went to Yale, so
Yeah.
it's really hard to say. And I think again, we're going back. I went to college, 40 years ago, so it's a very different world today. And I wonder, a, what the experience is today compared to the experience that I had and Lloyd and Michael
Hmm.
had at Yale, and b, whether the decisions we made then about college would be the same today, because things are very, very different in my opinion. Um, you know, but I think there are other career path points that I do think about at times, not the college one or the Cornell one, but when I left Troma, and essentially got out of the entertainment industry directly and went to work in the video and computer game industry.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll think, well, what if I had stuck with it? What if I had, gone to Hollywood or
Right.
really just doubled down on making movies as opposed to shifting into interactive entertainment.
Yeah.
But again, I look at a career as a long and winding road,
Right.
and you take different turns. And for me, the fun of my career is I've had the opportunity to work in a lot of different industries because I haven't had a definitive roadmap where I said, oh, in the next 5 years, I'm going to do this, this, and this. I instead kind of go with the flow and am opportunistic about things. And when opportunities came to get into the game industry, it appealed to me. When
Yeah.
opportunities came to be an entrepreneur and start a business from scratch, that appealed to me, even though it was a tech company. It had nothing to do with entertainment.
Yeah.
Yet in all of those industries and in all of the roles I've played throughout my career, I've been able to pull on things I learned from the entertainment industry in general and from Troma specifically, even in
Yeah.
my current roles. So, I think that's the fun of a long career, is being able to take things you learn at every stage and keep applying them and growing them as you move forward through different opportunities. And that's what I've always done. And that's why, I wrote this book, to highlight a lot of those lessons that I learned from my Troma experiences. And I utilize them to this day all the time.
All told, how long did you work for Troma?
7.5 years, which is a
7.5 years.
lifetime. That's dog years in Tromaville for sure. It's
Right.
dog years in Humanville.
But I mean, I love how, I mean, a relatively short amount of time in the grand scheme of life, right? And yet it obviously informs so much of your sensibilities, especially in marketing, because I mean, you could have written this book under any sort of banner, in any sort of fashion, but you decided to really, kind of tap into these things that you learned there. And you're definitely connecting with people like me, of course, who recognize its value. But I think that there's a lot in it that people outside of film can get from it too, right?
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that really pleased me when with the book, is that many of the reviews and many of the people I talk to are from people who never heard of Troma, never heard of the Toxic Avenger, and still found the stories entertaining and the lessons applicable to their careers.
Yeah. I
And,
mean,
and that was what I hoped for. Obviously the Troma fan's going to love it because there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff, but you know, people love the movies. Everyone loves the movies. Everyone, dreams about having the opportunity to be on a film set or do that. So I think
Yeah.
there's that level of appeal to anyone, even if they don't know Troma specifically, they're going to get a little sense of what it's like to make a movie, to be on a set, to go through that creative process and the lessons. It's interesting. A film is like a startup, right? Every single movie, it's like its
Right.
own little startup, but it's a startup on steroids because everything a filmmaker has to do is everything an entrepreneur does, but they do it in a much more concentrated time frame because an entrepreneur may take 3 to 5 years to grow their business and turn a profit, whereas a film, sometimes in 18 or 24 months you go from inception to shooting it, to editing it, to releasing it. It happens on a much more concentrated time frame, especially an independent film like Troma films were. We'd be
Right.
filming only for 8 or 12 weeks, and in those 8 to 12 weeks, you've got to, hire people, fire people, sometimes raise money. You've got to build out the plan, right? Which is, you have your whole production schedule on a day-to-day basis. And when you're making a film, you're accountable every single day, which is a lesson I think many entrepreneurs can learn. When you're in business, a lot of times you say you're busy, but are you really busy on things that are actually important? Are you busy with things that are actually moving your business forward?
Hmm.
When you're making a film, every day is scheduled. You've got certain actors that are only available at certain times. Locations are only available certain days and times. You've got to deal with the weather. You have to have a backup plan if you're going to be filming outdoors. You've got all these variables that you have to attend to every single day. And I learned that really when you're making a movie, there are 3 things that are the most important things, right? You have to have a camera, right? You can't make a movie without a camera. You have to have film in that camera. Today, of course, you have to have, digital storage to be able to record if it's a digital camera.
Right.
And then you have to have actors and actresses to get in front of the camera and tell your story. If you don't have those 3 things every single day, nothing else matters, right? It
Right.
doesn't matter if you have a screenplay by the greatest writer on the planet. You can't turn that screenplay into a movie without a camera, film, and actors, right? It doesn't
Right.
matter if you have the most talented director. If you've got Steven Spielberg, working for you, he can't make a movie. As talented as he is, he can't make a movie without a camera, film, and actors, right? So those are the 3 most important things. So I had to, as a production manager and line producer, I had to make sure that every single day those 3 things were there, right? So the camera truck with all of our equipment had to be the first thing on the set every day. We had to make sure we had sufficient film. The actors and actresses, even in a Troma movie, we made sure that they were being picked up at their homes every day if we weren't staying on location, so that they were there on time, and they weren't picked up in limousines like in Hollywood. They were picked up by a production assistant in their own beat up jalopy, right? But someone was knocking at the door several hours before they were needed on set to make sure they were awake and got them there, because if they didn't show up, we couldn't make a movie. So you learn to focus on those important things. And I
Yeah.
think in business, that's a good lesson. Like, we should all ask ourselves in our business, what are our equivalent of the camera, film, and actors? Like, what are the 3 or 4 things that actually matter every single day to keep our business
Right.
moving forward? So that was a really good lesson too.
So I always read stories about people like Woody Allen, et cetera. They make one movie a year. In other words, they have a big output. I think that they kind of make it, they write it, direct it, maybe act in it, but then they just move on, right? They pass that on to a distribution company who then they do all the marketing. But with Troma, it seems like they did everything from beginning to end, from screenplay all
Absolutely.
through the marketing. How did you, when you worked for them, how would anybody keep that momentum and the love of that project going long enough to see it through the whole marketing process as well?
Well, for me, that was part of the appeal and part of what makes it exciting. And I think that goes back to this notion of filmmakers or entrepreneurs, because that's the entrepreneurial journey, right? When you start a business, you have a concept, you got to figure out how to bring your product or service to market, and you got to grow it. You got to find your audience or your customers. And so for me, having that opportunity to do all those things and to not only get involved in writing and producing the film, but then go on the road to try to sell it to some foreign distributor. That was really exciting because you
Hmm.
see the whole picture. And I think
Yeah.
probably that experience helped lead me down a more entrepreneurial path later on in my career, where I've been the co-founder of several startups and got involved as more of an entrepreneur. Um, so I think it all goes very hand in hand. If you have that kind of entrepreneurial spirit and interest, having the opportunity to do all aspects of filmmaking and not just, be someone who's focused. Oh, I know how to do lighting and nothing else. Not that there's anything wrong with that. You need
Right.
expert people doing lighting, but having that
Definitely.
chance to see the complete picture from beginning to end, literally to selling it, I found to be very rewarding. And of course, from a Troma perspective, we were able to control the brand. No one's going to love your kid as much as you do, and no one's going to love your movie as much as you do. So because Troma movies have a certain je ne sais quoi about
Right.
them,
Right.
to hand that off to someone else who didn't quite get it, they might not get to that Troma audience. They might not get to the right people to see it. So I think, we understood and loved our products, and Lloyd understands them, better. It's in his DNA. Troma, if you cut Lloyd open, he doesn't bleed blood. He bleeds Troma.
Right.
he
It's
bleeds
very
Troma.
apparent,
He,
isn't it?
he
Yeah.
bleeds Troma.
Yeah.
No one you could hand it off to would do that. It'll be very interesting to see how this Hollywood version of the Toxic Avenger plays
Indeed, it
out, because it
will.
really is kind of the first time, Troma is sort of handing off the reins. Although my understanding is Lloyd and Michael will be involved in some level as co-producers, but they are handing off the reins to a different director, a different screenwriter. And Lloyd has said very good things about the screenplay so far. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out.
So what are you doing now, and how have you used some of the elements from the book and where you're at today?
Yeah, so great question. So right now, I'm the CMO of several companies. So I'm chief marketing officer of .club domains. So .club is one of the new top level domain name extensions. So instead of .com or .biz or .org, you can get a domain name that ends in .club. And it's actually really popular right now, partially because of this new app you may have heard about called Clubhouse, which is
Yeah.
basically a club of clubs. And a lot of people in Clubhouse are using a .club domain for their presence there. And I'm also the CMO of a pet products company called paw.com, Paw, paw.com, which makes these great pet products that look great in the home and are beautiful for your dog. And we actually run a startup incubator here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida called startups.club. And paw.com was one of the companies that was in our incubator, and we helped them in a number of ways. And I became their chief marketing officer as well. And I advised several other companies on the marketing side, kind of as a CMO to go. So it's been really busy and interesting. And I think a lot of these branding lessons and some of the culture stuff from Troma, I apply to these companies. Having been in the entertainment industry, when we launched .club, we wanted to do something kind of flashy and interesting for the domain industry. So I did a big cross promotion with 50 Cent, with Fitty, because when you think of Fitty, you think of the song "In the Club," and
Yeah. And vitamin water.
being able to he made more money from vitamin water than anything else, but being able to think in those terms and then navigate making that happen, dealing with his people, dealing with him as a celebrity, a lot of that I was able to do because of similar experiences that I had even at Troma. At Troma, while they weren't necessarily in our movies, we had a lot of high profile people in
Mhm.
Hollywood who were fans of Troma movies. I mentioned Stan Lee,
Mhm.
a number of directors. Peter Jackson was an early
Yeah.
Troma fan, and his early
Yeah.
films were very much like Troma movies. If you've ever seen his film
Right.
Bad Taste, Quentin
Definitely.
Tarantino used to visit our booth in the Cannes Film Festival.
Right.
So we, interacted with a lot of well-known celebrities, and that experience for me was very helpful, and I carried that forward as well. There's just a lot of instances, a lot of the marketing and branding strategies I have, I can um, take back to some of the things we did in Troma, and brand consistency, the authenticity, all those things. I talk about it in the book.
Do you think you're still a big kid at heart?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you have to be. If you want to really be happy and enjoy yourself, you have to. You never want to let that go.
And you've
I'm
been able
just
to
as silly,
maintain that your whole career.
absolutely. And when
Yeah.
Lloyd and I get together, even to this day, it's a one big pun fest. We're constantly trying to out pun each other, making silly and stupid Tromaville-esque poems and bad taste jokes. So that'll never end.
It's funny, you always hear these stories about Lloyd, but Michael's so far in the background, and it has to be deliberate, but there's almost no anecdotes about Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you plenty of anecdotes about Michael, but you know, they play their roles, and Lloyd is definitely the front man, but Michael is absolutely deeply involved, and he's very business oriented. So I don't think without Michael's skills and input and smarts, you know, I don't think the company would have survived for 45 years, right? Because you know, he really keeps the business side of things going, and Michael's an attorney as well. He has his law degree. So I think they complement each other. Just like, you know, if you had two Lloyds,
Right. It wouldn't work.
it would
Yeah.
be, I don't know. I think the world would explode. You'd have, you
I know
know,
what you mean. Yeah.
you know, it'd be, you know, spontaneous combustion would happen. But they complement each other very well. But Michael has Troma sensibilities too. A lot of some of the more Troma-esque gags and things that appear in some of the movies were Michael's ideas. I mean, he definitely contributes quite a deal, and he does co-direct a number of the films. So he's there in the background, and he's happy in that role. I think had he wanted to be more in the forefront or the spotlight like Lloyd is, he certainly had the opportunity to make that
Sure.
happen. But he, but he's, they are a team, very much so. And just like every movie begins with the logo, it says a Troma team production, a Troma
Yeah.
team release. I mean, it is a team, very much so. Lloyd, Toxie, and Kabukiman may be the face, but there is a big team there as well.
This is going to sound kind of morbid, I guess, though. But another thing that wasn't covered so much in the book too is what's the plan of succession in some of these cases when you create an empire like that, even a cult following empire, but Marvel, Disney, etc. I mean, those are so huge. What's Troma's plan of succession? Do you know?
I don't. I mean, you'd have to
Yeah.
ask Lloyd, but he's a avid runner. He eats well. He's in good shape. So
Yeah, God
hopefully,
forbid. Yeah.
hopefully we're in good shape there. But it is interesting when you build a brand. I mean, the Troma brand is and isn't Lloyd, right? I mean, the brand exists, the movie exists, but certainly Lloyd
Exactly.
is
Yeah.
many ways, in many ways,
I
the
mean, Toxic can live
personification.
forever. Kabuki
Toxic
Man
can
can
live
live forever.
forever.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Not only can they live forever, but anyone who throws the mask on can become them.
Well, I mean, that's the brilliance of it, really. I think about that. I think about Kiss. Like, I think Kiss is going to be a franchise that will outlive Gene and Paul. I think Kiss can
Right.
go on forever. It'll be a Vegas show for 100 years.
Absolutely. Look at
And
Blue Man group, right? How many Blue
yeah, that's
Men
the
are out
brilliance
there?
of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that there's a chapter about that in the book, how, everyone is expendable, even if you have a mask on, I think, or even if you wear a mask, that's the name of the chapter. But
Right.
yeah, I think there's an interesting story. We had several people play the Toxic Avenger, and,
Yeah.
and the person who played it, Mitch Cohn in the original movie, is not the person who plays it in part 2 or part 3 or part 4. And even within single Toxic Avenger movies, there are multiple Toxies happening. And some of that was very practical from a filmmaking and efficiency perspective. So the fact that anyone who could wear the mask could be Toxie meant that we could have the main Toxie doing a love scene with his girlfriend, while at the same time the stunt crew can be out filming a stunt with the Toxic Avenger, where the stunt man or stunt woman, stunt double is wearing the Toxic Avenger mask. So you can have multiple things happening at the same time. So yeah, there's a lot of efficiency to characters in the masks from a filmmaking perspective.
I was wondering if you could tell me the Toxie sticker story.
The one where I got banned from a restaurant for the rest of my
Yes.
life.
Yes. I've
Oh
underlined
gosh.
like several times. I got to ask him the story.
Yeah, I think the only time in my life that I've actually been in a fist fight, actually second time when something happened in Russia a couple of years ago, but that's a totally different story. But so, Troma is very big on promotion. There's a lot, and that's a lot of the stuff that I carry forward. The use of swag. Always having some kind of swag with you, because you never know who you're going to meet. So we would always have Toxie stickers in our pockets. Because you could slap them on anything. You could be in an elevator, especially at the Cannes Film Festival, where you're walking around. People are putting flyers and everything. So we would put Toxie stickers and everything. You could wear one on your chest, so all of a sudden you have a Toxie shirt on by just slapping the sticker on. So we were at the Cannes Film Festival promoting Troma, and we would go up to people and slap a Toxie sticker on them. We would joke around, and you'd pat someone on the back, and you'd actually be leaving a Toxie sticker on them, and they'd walk away, and they'd be walking around all day promoting Toxie, not knowing they had a sticker on their back. And that was all in good fun. And there was a very good Vietnamese restaurant that I had gone to for many years, even before I worked for Troma. I used to go there every time I was in Cannes when I worked at Satori. And I loved that restaurant. And it was a fun place because you could put your business card on the wall and under the glass of the table. So you'd go there and you'd see all these business cards from all these people in the entertainment industry. And I would go there and see my old business cards from when I visited years before. So I loved the place. And we went there for dinner, and I was with one of the guys on our team who was wearing Toxic. He wasn't wearing it that night, but he was there to play Toxic. And he got a little bit carried away with the stickering, and he put a Toxic sticker on a woman a little bit too close to her chest. And her boyfriend took immediate offense to it, and a fight broke out. Literally, chairs flying, tables being turned over, a true barroom brawl in this poor little Vietnamese restaurant, which had wonderful food and business cards on the table. And we got kicked out and thrown out. And I was told I was banned for life for ever going back there. And I was really bummed about it because it was one of my favorite restaurants. But lesson learned.
I hope you've been back there, right? They had to have forgotten. The Vietnamese aren't known for long memories, are they?
I have no idea. I just know it was a great restaurant. I'd been there forever, and I kind of think I'd be afraid to go back in because it was such a awful night that I fear that even years later, the proprietor probably would remember it, because I don't think that kind of thing happened very often in his restaurant.
So then what happened in Russia?
Oh, that's another story. That's the dot club story. But yeah, we were my business partner and I were kind of attacked by a drunk guy in Moscow one night, and my partner was sucker punched and hit right in the nose unexpectedly. I had the benefit of seeing him get hit, so when the guy turned around and tried to punch me, I was ready. So I kind of, grabbed his hand and pulled him down. He knocked my glasses off, but I didn't really get hit. It was kind of a crazy night in Moscow.
Oh man. What was next book? Are you writing a follow-up?
I have several that I've been taking notes on, and I haven't decided which I'm gonna do first, including some that continue the theme of everything I know about business and marketing I learned from, and instead of the Toxic Avenger, it'd be something else, some other experience I've had
Russian
in an
brawls.
industry, or
Yeah.
I've learned from being punched in Russia. No, that wouldn't be it. But yeah, I mean, I do. I'm always writing something. I always have at least one book or one screenplay in the works.
I was just going to ask, are you going to do a movie? When are you going to do a film?
Yeah, I mean, I've written and sold a couple of screenplays. I came very close to having one produced by Columbia Pictures a number of years ago. And then, Hollywood's a crazy place. The
Right.
producer that was assigned to it, he and his wife, who was a co-producer, went through a divorce, and then the whole thing fell apart, because of their divorce. That's
Yeah.
Hollywood. So who knows? Who knows? You never know.
Well, what about on your own? You thinking about shooting anything?
Right now I don't have the time. I mean, we are doing a little documentary about startups.club and sort of taking a look behind the scenes at some of the startups that have been flowing through our little incubator. So we've been shooting a lot of footage for that, and hope to put out kind of a docuseries about that, entrepreneurship, really focusing on entrepreneurship. So I've got that kind of in the background as well.
Any parting advice for a podcaster?
I think you're doing a good job. I think, podcasting is great. I've been a longtime podcast fan. I've produced a number of podcasts. I've been guests on a lot of podcasts. I think audio is a great platform. Obviously, podcasting is having a bit of a renaissance now, which is great. Spotify has been aggressively getting into it, both by acquiring companies and by pushing podcasts more to the forefront of their platform. So it's not just music. It's great. I mean, the beauty of audio is that you can multitask. I can listen to a podcast when I'm walking, when I'm driving, when I'm at the gym working out, which is video. I can't do that when I'm watching a video. I can't read something when I'm doing it. That's why audio is so powerful. That's why audio books are so strong, podcasting so strong. This new platform I mentioned earlier, Clubhouse, is audio only. It's been very interesting, and I encourage anyone. Right now it's iOS only, so if you have an iPhone and can get an invitation, I encourage you to check it out, because it's very nice to have actual conversations with people. You're not hiding behind a filtered photograph or a carefully edited video. You're actually talking with real people in real time, like we're doing now, but we could have people here in the room with us also talking to us, and other people just listening to us. I think people will be experimenting with podcasts from within Clubhouse, where they'll record the podcast in a Clubhouse room rather than here in Zoom or whatever you would use. And that way they can actually have a live audience and bring people also to the mic, or let people ask questions. It's very interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of innovation happening in the podcasting space over the coming months.
It's great. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Billy. It's a pleasure. And I hope everyone who's listening has gained something from this conversation. Thank you.
Me too. Thanks.